Hey guys, this is video 2 for lesson 3, and in this video I'm talking about Douglas's authorial choices. We've already been talking a lot about his authorial choices, but I guess the way that I'm going to differentiate this one from the other discussions is we're going to talk about how he uses diction, imagery, tone, structure, and maybe even mood in his chapters in the actual text of the book. And we're working on being able to read and analyze chapters 1 through 4 for that first mastery check that involves you reading the text. So the question I want you to ask is, what authorial choices do I look for when I read? And you'll notice if you take a look at the packet in lesson 3, there is a chunk that you're supposed to answer. And it's in this column here, explanation from the video. So look for that, and you're going to take some notes, okay? For this slide, you don't have to take any notes because I already have this stuff in there because I talked to you about it in lesson 2. Syncretic phrasing, introspective analysis, internalized documentation, and participant observation, or what you could call speech versus silence. So these 4 authorial choices I already talked to you about as being really important in terms of Douglas's control as an author, right? Authorial control. That's what that Yale scholar Robert B. Steptoe that I keep telling you about talks of so much in his book. So you could trace one of these if you wanted to. And I do think it's a good idea to pick one main authorial choice to trace. If you have to switch it up reading to reading, you have to switch it up, and that's fine. But I think it might be even more helpful if you're just tracing one throughout. So you already know what these 4 are. Well, let me show you some others that you could look for. Here they are. The first one is biblical language. Douglas uses references to the Bible and religion often. Sometimes he uses actual Bible verses. Sometimes it's a key word that hints at the Bible or Christianity, alludes to Christianity or the Bible. Sometimes he uses the technique of homage, and people have written about this before and published works about it. And he sort of recreates famous scenes from the Bible, but not quite from the Bible. He's telling his own story, and he is doing it as an homage to a similar scenario in the Bible. An homage is like a tribute to the original author. So you could watch for anything, especially if you're the kind of person who is forced to go to church every Sunday like I was as a kid, you may want to tackle this one. Those things might stand out to you. Use of maxims is an interesting one. I think this one would be really fun to trace. What is a maxim? Well, it's a saying, an adage, a proverb. It's some kind of well-known phrase. So watch how Douglas changes the original maxim. He does this a lot where he'll say, "It's said that," or "some people say that." But then he'll offer his kind of twist on it and say, "But really," or "but to the slave, it's this way." And he'll change it. So what implications does his revision have on his identity, or on the journey to freedom, or on the collective over the individual, and some of the themes we're looking at? How about names and the unnamed? I think this one would be really interesting to trace. Names always play an important role in books, you know this. But in this book, of course, they do as well. And it's part of the convention of the slave narrative that a slave renames himself once he has escaped, because he doesn't have the same kinds of name designations as people who are not slaves. And so that has become part of, or that became part of the conventions of slave narratives, as Steptoe has explained and I have summarized in the last lesson. So watch for this in the book. Who is named? What are their names? What implications might their names have? When do others get named? Are any characters unnamed? And what might the significance about that be? The last one I have here is the one that I'm going to offer you an example of: comparisons of humans to animals. Douglas compares characters or just general people to animals often in the book and for different effects. So on the very first page he uses this and he references slaves. But later in the book, he will talk about a slave breaker, an overseer, who he also compares to a particular kind of animal. And he does it all over in the book as well in varying ways. So you could trace that and see what you come up with for that. Let's talk about, there are 3 others, or at least 2 others, and then the third is you pick your own. Dark versus light. Douglas uses this oppositional pair, dark, light, opposites, right, throughout the book. So you could watch for that contrast. It's mentioned, it's used both like literally where we have something that's dark and something that's light, kind of coming together or side by side. And then, of course, figuratively as well. And you can think about what the effect of that choice might be. Tone is a good thing to watch for. Douglas's tone in the book changes. We hear different tones from him throughout. Anger and scorn, bitter and angry, nostalgic, hopeful. Watch for signs of his tone and trace those changes. And then if you can find anything else, go for it. I think that is the best way, really, to analyze literature, is when you can find something yourself. Now, this is an old text, and sometimes I feel like the older the text is, the more help we need to trace authorial choices, because the language is so foreign from our own. So if you don't trace your own thing, that's okay too. No problem. Either way is fine. Let me show you an example of what you're going to want to do. Here is my example on the comparison of people to animals. Right away on the first page of the book, which is in our text, page 19, we see an example. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs. So I've got one example, and that's my must do. Now my should do is I should find 2 more, but you know what? I couldn't find any more comparisons of people to animals in this first chunk. Now if you can, then that's awesome. You write those down. But now I need to do some analysis. This is a name it and claim it. And this has to do with DITs. What is DITs? Diction, imagery, tone, and structure. And I'll make another video that goes into more detail about what these are. But diction is word choice. And I noticed that this plays a role in the quote because of the word horses. So I'm going to skip these other slides and go back to the analysis. Douglas compares slaves to horses here because just as horses don't know when they were born or how old they are, slaves do not know their birth dates. The comparison is made through diction and structure. So diction is what I'm focusing on. The key word is horses. The parallel structure of the sentence created with slaves know as little as horses know sets up the comparison well because the sentence structure is repeated. So I go on to talk about sentence structure. I'm really talking about 2 separate authorial, or 2 separate elements of language, diction and structure here, but you only have to do 1. All right, and then I talk about the evaluation. This is what the effect of the choice is on the reader. So the comparison of horses to slaves focuses on the inhumane treatment of slaves. The choice of horse enhances the idea of a beast of burden too, since horses are hardworking farming animals that labor for their masters by carrying loads of work, machinery, and people. And so the fact that that particular animal is used to compare to slaves is enhancing this feeling that the slaves are also beasts of burden. They're laboring for the masters with these difficult physical tasks. Interpretation is the last part. And this is like, so what? How does this create meaning? How does it tie to theme? And so I put here, I see the theme of the collective over the individual here because Douglas was one of these slaves. And instead of just mentioning himself, he immediately puts himself in the group of slaves who he reminds us are treated as beasts of burden. So that's one way to look at it. I think it could probably tie to all 4 themes, but you only have to tie it to 1. So this is what I want you guys to do as you are reading for this first deadline. Trace an authorial choice along with the theme. All right, enjoy the first 4 chapters of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass.